Hello, this is Kemper Holt reporting for AVShowrooms. Today we're doing a review of the Endeavor E3 Mark II loudspeakers from Leif Swanson and VSA. Just a little background, because the two are linked pretty closely. Leif worked running a CNC shop making cabinets for von Schweikert, and the two became friends over time. And lucky for Leif, he kind of got invited to be tutored by Albert von Schweikert. I would call it crossover 101, or maybe crossover 401 for the advanced situation they're in now. And the whole team grew pretty close, Damon, Albert, and Leif Swanson. So Leif loved the von Schweikert VR4 Juniors, and they were long out of production, and he kind of wanted to put a modern spin on it, and started working a little bit on it. And everyone thinks that Leif left von Schweikert. He actually rented the space next door and became Endeavor. And in the development of the product, which he used, a very similar lineup to the VR4 Juniors, two smaller woofers, single mid tweeter. To bring it all together, Albert looked over Leif's shoulder. They worked carefully together to voice the Endeavor product. So it may have seemed that he left and went on his own, but they were actually pretty closely tethered the whole time. So at some point, Albert, let's call it semi-retired, and in that period of time, Damon von Schweikert and Leif Swanson became heads of von Schweikert. And that's how it remains today, with Albert still active, but more in the background, shall we speak. For von Schweikert, crossover topology and cabinet technology have always been at the forefront. Taking the cues from the VR4 Junior, he went with the two smaller woofers, single mid-range, and a nice tweeter. First, let's get the Mark II designation out of the way. It was not a major change. Initially, Leif voiced the product to be placed a couple feet out from the wall, and he got some room gain from it, so he voiced the bass to be proper for that. As it turns out, the dealers were pulling the speakers 4 and 5 feet from the wall to get that fabulous soundstage effect, and there was just a slight, maybe thinness to the bass. So in the Mark II generation, what he did primarily was to redo the Zobel network and make the bass fuller and better in all locations, out from the wall or closer to the wall. And I believe he changed the sourcing of the ring radiator tweeter to ScanSpeak. So the Mark II generation really isn't that much different. It was not a huge makeover. It was just a fine-tuning. The E3s are big enough to dig deep into bass, but small enough so that they don't dominate a room. Very important in many cases, domestic cases especially. They are built to absolute furniture quality. These things are fabulously finished. They look gorgeous. My wife's comment is, do we have to go back to those big black things you have? So yes, dear, we have to. The E3s are really pretty, and they disappear both sonically and visually. Tough thing to do. The front baffle, very different from most. The front baffle is wider than the rear, so it tapers narrower as you go back. Now this also helps the disappearing act, because most speakers which are rectangular, towed in or not, you see the sides of the speaker. Here, you really have to go way off axis to see the sides of the speaker as they taper back. It just disappears. So it's a very chameleon-like speaker. It fits in many decors, doesn't dominate, goes deep as well. Getting onto the cabinet, Leif used the techniques that VSA has been using for years. Number one, trying to use slightly different size panels so that the panels don't all resonate at the same frequency. You're going to have some vibration or resonance, but if you have them resonating at different frequencies, you don't have that one peak where everything comes apart. They also use, even in the E3s, a laminate process with 3 different materials. The middle material being a vibration dampening, viscous, non-hardening material that really pulls it all together. And the speaker is very, the knuckle wrap test is very dead. No resonating, no hollowness, just knock, knock, knock. Very, very dead cabinet, which contributes to their clarity. The speaker makeup is similar to the VR4 Junior. Leif is using 2 7-inch aluminum cone drivers for the woofers. They have a phase plug, which not only helps the sonics, but is a heat dissipating device which helps raise their enormous power handling capabilities. Speaking about power handling, the first time I heard the E3s at Rocky Mountain Audio Fest, the bassist Dean Peer was playing directly into the E3s. And myself and others at sometimes feared for our lives as we thought the woofers were either going to burst out of the cabinet or catch on fire. Either one, we didn't know what was going to happen. Even Leif was surprised that they could take that kind of punishment and sound terrific. So speaking about power handling, they can take virtually anything you can dish out. They really can play loud without fatigue. Leif, being a musician, that was one of his criterion. These things have to get down a boogie. They can't sound glary or strident when you get them loud, and they don't. You can play them loud. My typical scenario would be low 80s to mid 80s on an average, low 90s to mid 90s peak, but when a song comes along that I really want to crank, I can crank it up, and no trouble whatsoever, just a big smile on my face. So power handling is a forte for the E3s. The 2 7-inch woofers are loaded in a method that is not bass reflex, although there's a port. The 2 woofers are loaded into a critically damped design. Again, not bass reflex, but it acts like a transmission line, or more precisely an aperiodic loading. There's no real output from the port. It allows the woofers to be quick, to stop quick, and there's no resonances above and beyond that. It's just a very tight, quick and clean bass response. The E3s are right about 89 dBs at 1 watt, 1 meter efficient. They're a 3-way design. The crossovers, the bass crosses over around 220 to the mid-range, and the mid-range gives off to the ring radiator treater around 1.8K. The low frequency crossover is pretty low, so the mid-range is handled almost exclusively by the fast 6.5-inch mid-range. Speaking of the 6.5-inch mid-range, it is a carbon fiber Kevlar combination, making it rigid, quick, stops fast, starts fast, very fast rise time. The dual ring radiator from ScanSpeak has a big dynamic range, and it extends way beyond 20K. The treble here, the brushwork, the percussion I hear is precise, it's clear and clean, and it's definitely not buried in the mix. You definitely hear all the subtleties coming right through. The secret sauce, which, as it's always been for von Schweikert, is in the crossover, which is time aligned and phase corrected, which even in a 3-way typically lets voices and instruments sound more like the real thing. Very cohesive, just a invisible type crossover that doesn't let you pick out the drivers individually. It comes on as of one kind of sound. It does come from the factory with beautiful outriggers. The speaker is tall and slender, as I mentioned, being disappearing very quickly, very easily. And the outriggers keep, for instance, my 5-year-old grandson from accidentally tipping them over. They're very stable. The endpoints of it allow you to easily adjust the rake angle of the speaker by just turning a knob, 2 in the back or 2 in the front, and changing its rake angle. That leads me to tell you about the system the E3s are connected to. I have an Exogal Comet Plus DAC, which is feeding currently an AudioNet Watt integrated. It may look small, but this thing is ridiculously heavy. It is so well built. And everything is laced together, USB, interconnect, and speaker cables with the latest Audience AU24SX cabling. Just terrific. In addition to that, in the system has been the Valve Amplification Company, VAC, Sigma 160i SE tube integrated amp, and a pair of Odyssey Kismet monoblocks. That kind of completes all the things that I've subjected the speakers to. And now, on to the listening session.